The idea that someone would be intellectually crippled is pretty horrible to me. And so the idea that this young woman will forever have a mental age of 7, which is fine if you're 7 years old. It's charming, it's wonderful, and it's why we love children. But next year they have to be 8, and the next year they should be 9, and the next year they should be 10, and they should be getting more adult in their behavior and their thinking as time passes. But here's this very attractive, very nice 30-year-old woman who's always going to be 7 years old. And in a certain way, that's worse than taking her life, because you've taken her mind. She's probably, because she's wealthy, her family is wealthy, she's going to have a comfortable physical life. I think there's a part in the book where the narrator has her in a situation where she looks faintly puzzled and uncertain about why she's puzzled, and she becomes very troubled at something she doesn't know she's troubled by. And maybe that would happen if you see people all around you who behave in a different way from you. And so whether it's worse to kill someone's mind or kill someone's body, I don't know. I really don't know. I could argue both. Each is horrible in its own way. It's brought on to her by the fact that her brain was deprived of oxygen for enough minutes to do enough damage to lock her into being 7. And those things don't get better. She's not, even if she goes to Lourdes or Medjugorje, she's not going to change. And that to me is the real awfulness of this book, because this really is an awful book. What happens to her is awful. And I think that the people in the book don't realize it fully, and there isn't a full discussion of it in the book. But that's because I don't think it has to be discussed. If anyone has any sort of sensibility or imagination, I think that they will respond to this child woman's destiny with the same kind of cringing horror that I do, and that other people who have read the book have. In some ways, it's the worst of the books, because what is done to her is worse than anything I've done to anybody else. It's cleaner to kill somebody. What I wanted to do, and I wanted to do it because I've been reading the novels of Ross MacDonald, who's a crime writer I admire very highly, and who is a writer that Diogenes is retranslating and reissuing. I'm writing introductions to them, so I had to read his books closely. And I was struck by the way MacDonald uses again and again the trope of having something happen now, but the cause of it, which is ultimately discovered in the book each time, is something that happened 20 years before. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could do that. How did he do that? How did he keep everything lined up the right way? How did he maintain chronological order over 300 pages? So I said, let me see if I can try that. So I had things start now, but reflect back on 15 years. And it's not easy, because one has to be very, very tight with chronology, how old people are, how they respond, how much they know, how much they think, how much is revealed to them, how much they knew then and what affects them now, how much memory they have and how that affects. It's tremendously complicated. But I did it, and I'm very pleased that I managed to do this, and it makes me respect MacDonald's genius even more than I have in the past, because he did it with every book. I don't know, in a way I'm a dentist. The analogy that comes to mind is a dentist. I'm sure a dentist doesn't like sticking needles in people's mouths and hurting them, but that's part of the job. In order for the person not to feel the pain of the dentist has to go, and in order to make a reader feel some sort of sympathy for the various characters in the book, the characters have to suffer. I have to stick the needles in. No, I don't like doing it, but the devil made me do it. No, I have to do it. I think in the past people like crime books because crime books offer what life usually doesn't. That is, a crime book solves it. It tells you who did it and why they did it. And usually, at least in the classic novel, the person who did it is punished. In modern times, this isn't the usual path of a crime book. Very often in contemporary crime literature in the last decade or so, in the last 20 years, the reader finds out who did it, but who did it isn't punished. And that's what happens in my books most of the time. The crime happens, Brunetti asks questions and puts things together, and then finds out who did it, and sometimes can and sometimes cannot arrest the person, because sometimes the proof is and sometimes the proof is not sufficient. But very often in the end of these books, one is left with that empty feeling of he's going to get away with it, or he's already got away with it, which to me is reflective of modern life. One just has to look at Italy to see that the big things, who planted the bomb there, who shot down the plane in Ustica, 30 years later, 40 years later, nobody knows. Who killed Aldo Moro? Nobody knows. Who, well, they know who killed Borsellino and Falcone, they know that. But they really don't know who else was involved in that decision to murder these two judges. And they never will. And I think that these books do reflect a certain kind of non-truth which permeates solutions in Italy. It wasn't really an idea. I knew, I had the good sense when I wrote this book, because I had never thought of writing a murder mystery. So when I invented the character that I had the sense to know that I would spend a certain number of months with, 6, 8, 10, 12, 200, I didn't know. I wanted him to be a person with whom I would want to spend many months. And indeed, he's a man with whom I've now spent 26 years. And I still like him, and I still find him very interesting, both in terms of sensibility and in terms of intelligence. I like him. Had I made one of these hard-boiled guys, problems with alcohol, problem with drugs, problem with women, problem with work, problem with his wife, problem with it, who lives on hamburgers and black coffee, I'm sure I would have leapt out of a building by now, because I'd found myself locked in this deadly, toxic marriage with a person I didn't like. But I had the sense to make him someone who is, to me, molto simpatico, and he remains that. And he's also a reader, and I would find it very difficult to spend a long time with someone who didn't read a lot. And his wife surprises me more, and the conversations that they have, this amiability that goes back and forth between them, that still surprises me. And that's very, very nice to write about, because they have this kind of ironic treatment of one another. They're both very English in the way they deal with one another. They seem to be sarcastic, but there's always the firm grounding in absolute love between them that allows them the liberty to treat the other person with a certain amount of apparent lack of respect. Really. I just wanted to tell this story. And I couldn't, because in life, as a woman of my age, of my generation, I've spent my life with know-it-alls. I have spent my life working for know-it-all men. And the last thing I could stand to do would be to create and be responsible in life for yet another know-it-all man. There's enough. Basta. Basta with know-it-all men. And so he's not a know-it-all. In fact, he's always curious about trying to figure out what he doesn't know, because he goes into these things admitting that he doesn't know. He doesn't understand why these things happened. But because he has common sense and sensibility and compassion, he learns why people do things. And very often at the end, he still doesn't understand why they did it. Because I think to understand why people do things, there has to be something in you that could possibly do it. I can understand murder with no, because at times people irritate me, and I say, I reach for the baseball bat. But I could never torture anyone. So I can understand a murderer, sort of, but I could never understand a torturer. I can't get there. I can't understand, I can't imagine why someone might take satisfaction from that. But I can understand easily why someone would take satisfaction, immediate satisfaction, instantaneous satisfaction from killing somebody. Sure, we all want to do that at times. But not making them suffer,